Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge in negotiation and high-impact conversations for business leaders with skin in the game. We want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and increase profitability and opportunities. With expert guests across the business spectrum, we deliver gems of wisdom, delving into their methods, their thinking, and approach to problem solving, life, business, and many other things. This is the Grande Cup of Insight, long-form podcast interview where we take a little bit more time to dive deeper into our guests' experiences, stories, principles, and to get those priceless nuggets for you. I'm your host, Al McBride, and my guest today is Michael F Schein. Now, Michael is the head hype man at Microfame Media, a company that specializes in making consultants and coaches famous in their fields. Some of his clients have included eBay, Magento, the Medici Group, the University of Pennsylvania Gordon College, University of California Irvine, United Methodist Publishing House, Ricoh, LinkedIn, and Citrix. His writing has appeared in Fortune, Forbes, Inc., Psychology Today, and the Huffington Post. And he is a speaker for international audiences spanning from the northeastern United States to the southeastern coast of China. His book, The Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers, is published by McGraw-Hill and appears where books are sold. And as someone who's just read the book recently and enjoyed it thoroughly, I can't recommend it enough. Welcome to the show, Mike. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Al. And thank you so much for your kind words about the book. That means a lot.
Yeah, no problem. What inspired you to write it? I mean, there's a lot in there. We'll get into some of that content, some of those nuggets in there. But what made you think, I have to spend hundreds of hours to create this thing for people?
Well, like any other big project, and this was a big project, it's not a short story. I mean, this in a lot is the culmination of a lot of years of my work as in many different fields. I mean, in some ways, I threw everything I knew into this book. So, I mean, it should be said that I was a writer first. I never wanted to be involved in business. I know a lot of people don't want to be involved in business. I was allergic to the idea of business. I mean, when I was 5-6 years old, I wanted to write novels. I mean, that early, I saw myself as an artsy kind of person. And over time, I also got into music. And I think that I was always really interested in artists who weren't pure artists, where the hype was part of the art. So, like when it came to music, I wasn't really big on the singer-songwriters in the denim. I was into Bowie and Devo and Alice Cooper and the punk, the Sex Pistols, and bands and artists who the actual stirring the pot and stirring up attention was as much a part of the art as the songs. And similarly to literature and movies and things. I loved Quentin Tarantino when I was a kid, and stuff like that. And so I sort of had that inclination. And over time, I tried my hand at music. And I had a band in New York when I was in my early 20s that we certainly didn't succeed, but we did, I think, better than most people thought we would do, considering I was a pretty mediocre guitar player and singer. And
you did, and I love that use of that stories and some of the lessons you learned. And because as I said, you mightn't have made the charts or like super big stadium rock or anything, but
no,
you went further than on reflection you might have done otherwise. But what were some of the lessons that you learned from that?
Well, so that was the beginning of my hype journey. I mean, I certainly never would have used the word marketing to describe what we did. But there's this band in the Lower East Side of Manhattan called Arlene's Grocery, which has subsequently become really quite legendary, and that the Strokes got their start there and some of those kind of bands. And we used to sell it out pretty regularly. We had a residency there. And the way we would do it, we would always get together and say, how are we going to hype up this show? So one thing we did was, this was something that wouldn't have flown today, but we put up posters all over town that said Dave Matthews Must Die, because we hated those hippie kind of bands, and we put that up. So that got attention. we had a song called Ash Wednesday. So I would dress like a nun, both on stage and walking around, and handing out flyers. And we would do things like this. And so, as these things do, it's sort of, the other, I think, legendary thing that we did, legends in our own minds, but we talked our way onto Showtime at the Apollo. I don't know in the UK how famous that show is, but it's at the famous Apollo Theater. But there was one night a week, and it was on TV that they would pick certain amateurs to go on. And sometimes very famous people were discovered. I think maybe the Jackson 5 might have done it, but they always have people on there who get booed off, and they really boo you off, the audience. So we knew we would get booed off, but we somehow worked our way onto this show, and did this ridiculous song, and people booed us off. And we got in the front page of the New York Press for doing that. So we always knew how to sort of do this kind of stuff. So that was the beginning of my interest in hype. And this story goes on and on. I can tell as much or as little as you want, but it really started to inform when I finally got into the professional world. I was in a corporation for a while, and I just kind of became, year by year that I was there, a more normal guy who believed in normal corporate things. And when I eventually went off on my own to start a freelance writing business, I didn't do very well at getting customers, even though, I can write pretty well. I've always been known to, but I was kind of marketing instead of hyping things up. I had kind of bought into the idea that you needed to learn SEO and this and that. Yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I was just like, that's a brilliant description there, that you see a huge difference, a chasm of a difference between what we're talking about, hype, and standard marketing. And you're referring to marketing as these sort of systems and SEO and all that sort of stuff. How would you explain hype then to someone? Because a lot of people, now you mentioned this, you go into this quite a lot in the book, that hype has a lot of negative connotations. So talk us through that.
Yeah, I dream of a day where marketing has negative connotations and hype is considered a good thing. Because to your point, it used to mean one thing, but what it really means, I think, to most people is tactics first. If only I can learn how Clubhouse works, or how podcasting works, or how blogging works, or how TikTok works, all my dreams will come true. And I don't, that I see hype, people think of that as a negative. And traditionally it has been. It was this concept that you were blowing a lot of smoke around things that weren't valuable. But, in hip hop, hype is considered a positive. It's considered, getting people to pay attention to your stuff, because in the early days, hip hop was an outsider sort of art form. So I define hype as any activity or set of activities that get large numbers of people extremely emotional, so that they'll move in a certain direction that you want them to go. And, those tactics that you use or strategies to hype things up can be used for ill. And they often are, because a lot of times the people who get this stuff naturally are people who don't let emotions get in the way. They don't let rules get in the way. But they can also be used for a lot of positive, and have. But hype itself is simply neutral. This is the way human beings process reality in groups. And this is what you do to get them emotional based on that reality. And you can use it for good or bad. And I think people have been hyping things for years. Marketing is fairly new. And it was when I got that distinction that everything changed. I just want to say, when I was trying to market myself, I failed. Yeah. And when I switched over to learning from my past and hyping things up, my business started to do really well. So that was where the book ultimately came from.
So, I mean, you have some great points in the book. You have, as I said, the 12 key ones. Are there ones that people talk to you the most about? Like, which are the ones you get the most pushback from an audience or from a reader? Are there a few that are particularly more? Because I felt some of them are like, I don't know. You definitely caused an emotional reaction. I wasn't bored through the book. Some I was like, yeah, right on. And others I was thinking, oh, that's a bit edgy. I just wonder which ones before.
Which one bothered you? I'm curious. I actually, let me flip. It cut off for a sec. What were you saying?
Sorry. No, I was just going to say there are quite a few. Like this, even from the start, you start strong with the idea of picking a fight. And that's a really interesting one. I mean, I got it. I completely understand the word of having a unique point of view is very important, not being shy about the unique point of view. And that often that unique point of view can do really well if it's in opposition to what most people think. right? Or a contrarian point of view. It's interesting. How much conflict would you advise, like when you're talking to clients, how much conflict would you advise that they open themselves up to?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you picked that as the one, because that's the one people say, it was the one I was going to say. I mean, people have a problem with that one. It's the first type strategy in the book because in many ways it's the most important. So the strategy is make war, not love. And what that basically means is that human beings are much more driven by being against something than they are for being for something. And what I think is really interesting about this is you get to the heart of the matter. A lot of times we decide what we think is true based on what we want to be true and how we think the world ought to be, rather than how it is. We'd all love to live in a world, or most of us were, where everyone was friends and everyone, if you just put a great idea out there, people would see how wonderful the idea was or the product was and just come to it. And you just have to lay out your argument logically enough. I mean, you know this from negotiation, right? Mm-hmm. Logic has very little to do with it. So I'm not saying be a troll, right? I'm not saying go out and insult people. That can get you, A, it's not ethical in a lot of cases, and B, it's a horrible way to live your life. And now you can get with social media in a lot of hot water doing that.
Of course.
What I'm saying is that, so it's funny. I got to do some really fun sort of anthropological sort of research as a result of this book. And I found this one really interesting story about this anthropologist, Curtis Marion. He found this alcove in South Africa, on the coast of South Africa. And it's pretty certain that that's where every ancestor of every human being today alive is from, because there was this big climate change event and most human beings, Homo sapiens, died, on the savannah. And this one small group of human beings, we almost went extinct, ironically, because now there's 8 billion people on the earth, but and we make everyone else go extinct. But at the time, we almost went extinct. And there's really strong evidence that a small group of human beings, African human beings, of course, because everyone was African, went to the coast of South Africa, and there was this area that was very, very dense in shellfish, oysters and things like that. So shellfish are very high in calorie. They're very nutritious, and you don't have to do a lot of work to get them compared to hunting or finding plants that are edible. And so the only thing keeping people from eating this food was other people. So all of these people were genetically the same. It was a small group of African people from the same savanna. But the hypothesis, and it's very close to a theory now, is that those human beings who were very good at cooperating with people they perceived to be like them, perceived being the key term, and drive out and hate people they perceived not to be like them, were the ones that survived and passed on their genes. And we're all descended from these people. So what does that mean? It means that we create these arbitrary tribal designations, right? I mean, I'm in our country, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm an American, I'm British, I'm a Eagles fan, I'm a Man United fan, I'm an Arsenal fan, whatever. Sure. And we define ourselves by what we're against. And so it causes racism, that's what causes all of these horrible things. But at the same token, if you know that this is a function of reality, and hype artists do, you can use it in ethical ways. So you don't have to pick a fight with a person. You can pick a fight with an idea, right? So the company Basecamp, which was a project management tool, they picked a fight with the idea that corporate work needs to be a 70-hour-a-week complex workaholic affair. And they had a product that was very, very simple. It only does 5 things as a project management tool or whatever it is. So they could have gone out there and said, use our project management tool. It's very, very simple. And they would have sold some stuff. But instead they said, we are against modern work culture. And they have this tribe around them that just so happens to use their software as a mechanism to getting where they want to be. And there's a level of dedication for that company that you just don't see for Salesforce.
It's a very good point. And you remind me of your example as well of Apple, of course, adopting the same, that it's not a better computer. It's a whole lifestyle that appreciates design and creativity. Which I know you mentioned Simon Sinek a few times in the book.
I want to say something funny about Apple.
Please do.
That I didn't say in the book. I used to work at this place called the Brooklyn Writers Space, which you had to be a quote unquote serious writer to work there. And a lot of really great writers are there. But if you know anything about Brownstone, Brooklyn, it's a very liberal, crunchy kind of place. So I would work in this, and these are writers. So I would work in this place, and I have a lot of friends from there. So this is not against anyone. I fall into this camp, I'm sure. But, the women don't wear a lot of makeup. Most 98% of people, if not 100, are Democrats. People go to the food co-op, and they're not into brands. They're very anti-commercial, anti-capitalist. And you would go into the writing room and there were 0 PCs, 100% Apples. So these were anti-brand people who bought the more expensive computer to show that they were anti-brand people, because that's what Apple is. Now, Apple was at one point the most valuable company in the world. They are a massive multinational corporation, but somehow they've done such a good job of defining themselves as the anti-corporate PC, the anti-business computer, that a bunch of people who think of themselves as anti-commercialist to have a computer which costs twice the amount of the other computer to show that they're part of that tribe.
I mean, they even had it in one of their earliest, most famous ads, didn't they?
No,
so 1984
they
won't be 1984. Remember?
Yeah.
Throwing the hammer and all the amazing stuff. Tell us about your own little adventure there when you decided to pick a fairly friendly fight by the sounds of it, but you stood in opposition to some of the thinking and the preaching. Let's be honest, that's what you'd probably call it, of Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary Vee, as he's widely known. Talk us through that. Yeah. And tell us more about that one.
Well, yeah, this has been my minor claim to fame on this earth, that I picked a fight with Gary Vee. For those of the audience who don't know, I mean, Gary Vaynerchuk started with Wine Library TV, which was an amazing company, and Wine Library, where he created all kinds of content, and he sold wine online by being very authentic about who he was, and that kind of brash personality. And then he did so well with that, marketing it online, that he positioned himself as an internet guru, and he did very well with that. And he would regularly do these talks where he would, the message I just kept hearing over and over, especially 10 years ago, with hustle, hustle, hustle. So most of his audience was young men and aspiring entrepreneurs. Aspiring being the key word. And he would constantly tell them that if you're not working 24/7 doing social media, tweeting at the time, then you're going to fail, So he said, is this a show that you can curse on or no? I was going to quote Gary Vee because he likes to curse a lot.
Curse away. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So I remember one time, his funniest one, he said, I get up at 3 a.m. and I go and take a shit, and I'm tweeting while I take a shit. Like, that's how that you can't take a shit in peace or read a magazine. You have to be tweeting about your business while And I was a nobody. This was when I was really struggling. I was still trying to market myself, and I would see this stuff, and it annoyed me. I mean, I'll be frank. I really have a lot of respect for him as a business person, but I would see him giving this advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, of which I was one, and I was working like a dog. And I was like, this brute force approach doesn't work. I've tried it. It doesn't work. And now I started building, creating a systematic approach to copy. That's what I did in the beginning, not what I do now. And I was like, that's what people should be learning. And I would say, I have a feeling that Gary Vaynerchuk, all of this preaching is helping him, not helping his fans, because when he gets people, the Moonies get people to work 60 hours a week on behalf of the cause, because it creates a bond. So I wrote an article that basically said Gary Vaynerchuk is wrong about this, and that if you want to be successful, follow what he does. Don't follow his advice. And so he saw this article, and I cannot convey to you how much of a nobody I was at this time. This was like more than a decade ago, 12 years ago, 11 years ago. He made a video, and he started calling me by name, and it was in ink, the article. And he started out very nice. And by the end, I guess I really got under his skin because he became coherent. I showed it to a friend. What is this? Like, this guy is really agitated. Like, why is he sweating? You know, like, why is he like talking about how much money he has? You know, and so, but so he's a massive star, and his fans are like cult members. So they all started blowing up my Twitter at the time, talking about how I was an idiot and I was lazy and all of this. And and at the time, I hadn't really formulated this theory of hype. So I was like, I think my career is over. Like, I just pissed off this guy, you know, this giant. And it was the beginning of my career. It turned out there were all these other people who felt like I did. They were anti-hustle culture, and they didn't have a leader. So that was the beginning. I mean, now I have my own following, and I have a book, and I'm published by McGraw-Hill, and I have a successful business, and I can track all of that back to this moment, to this article.
So the moment you took a stand and pushed back, you polarized, and as you said, well, for want of a better word, you picked a fight, and it all started from there. So,
well, and that was also the moment that I shifted from marketing to hype. I mean, it was kind of a punk rock thing to do that. You know, I kind of borrowed that, like the Sex Pistols used to pick fights, sure. And I was like, I should just pick a fight with this guy. And when that worked, when I was unprofessional and it worked, and then I started saying, why am I trying to market when I was so successful hyping myself up? So I started to get much more benevolently mischievous in all of my promotional stuff. So it wasn't so much the Vaynerchuk article. It was that really changed my mindset. You asked in the beginning how I journeyed to write that book. The journey with that article.
Awesome. Also, it sounds like there's an awful lot of creativity and playfulness with a lot of that. You know, you mentioned mischievous, you know, it's that same sort of, Bart Simpson type of playfulness.
I think so.
And you reminded me of that.
I think so.
You reminded me of that when you were talking, you know, about sort of Shep Gordon and some of his adventures. For those who don't know, Shep Gordon, you know, he was a music manager and an agent. And, you know, you tell the Alice Cooper story in London, which was quite brilliant. And I mean, just to tell that one very quickly, you know, Alice Cooper, sort of rock band, fairly big in the States, not a great following in the UK. And, you know, he hypes them up by having a very controversial photo of Alice on the cover himself, and just a boa constrictor covering his private regions. And this truck with the billboard breaks down, in inverted commas, in the middle of wherever it was, Piccadilly Square, centre of London, at rush hour. And of course, all the tabloids, and he was ringing people saying, oh, this is a disgrace, and just starting all the hype. It took on a life of its own. They even talked about it in Parliament. Should they be banned from Britain? You know, perverting the minds of our youth and all this. And as you said, so he picked a fight, so to speak, with the conservative parents of Britain, so that the kids would go, this is great, this is for us. It's not for her. And he'd sell out Wembley. So I don't know, there's something kind of playful and benevolent about that in reflection, certainly. When you're advising clients or you're advising people listening to this, what would you, because we're talking about polarization, we're talking about taking a stand, a unique point of view. Is it that kind of thing where just find things that irritate you, that you deep down believe to be wrong or incorrect or only correct in a certain way? How would you suggest people go about it?
No, I mean, remember, this is only one of 12 hype strategies, but there's a lot to say here. One is that you really hit the nail on the head. And in a lot of interviews I do, people don't bring up the playfulness part. They just think of it a lot as like, oh, this is a way to promote yourself. But, you know, people think of hype as negative. I think hype is playful. I've always been interested in art where the benevolent mischief was as much a part of the art as the art itself. And I think this same can be true in business. I think that if you're following the herd and marketing yourself just like everyone else does, you're inevitably, unless you're very, very lucky, going to get swallowed up and have very incremental growth, if any, right? But if you approach things with the spirit of, let's just see if this happens. You know, actually, his name, Richard, a great a great Englishman says that when he decides what he's going to do, and a great hype man, he says, I say, what the fuck? That's what he says. You know, if he doesn't have that feeling of what the fuck, he's not going to do it. So I think that embracing that spirit of play and irreverence, not maliciousness, not lying, in fact, never lie, but being irreverent, I think, is a really great way to approach things. In regards to that actual strategy, which is a very powerful strategy, you know, we use all these examples like Alice Cooper and this and that, which are, a lot of people always say, well, I'm not Alice Cooper. I own an insurance adjusting business, you know, right. or a sheet metal business or whatever, right? And the concept is I use those examples to illustrate a point because those people tend to be better at hype. But these are pure mass psychology principles. They can be reapplied to anything. So if I'm, and I use business examples in the book, like Basecamp, you know, project management is a very boring field, right? So what I would do is there are two questions I always ask my clients. I say to them, what is a point of view held by the majority of people in your industry that you just hear time and time again, like gossip, that actually annoys you, that you really think is misguided? You know, I mean, it might be something like in the innovation consulting space, which I have clients in, all you hear is disruption happens. Disruption. You have to be careful about disruption. You need to disrupt. If you think about it, there's an argument to be made that disruption doesn't really happen that frequently. No, you know? Sure. So in other words, what's a point of view that's just gospel? And then the other thing is, what's a point of view that you are 100% confident is the truth? Not 98%, 100%, that many of the people that you encounter in your field don't agree with. And if you can answer those questions and build sort of a communications strategy around that, you'll go pretty far. Because if you don't feel differently than everyone else, why are you even in business? Honestly.
And this is a great point. I mean, this is something that, you know, when I'm setting up, helping clients with negotiations, and this is regardless of whether they're, you know, 20 grand a deal or 100 million a deal, what you see is, and this is something that people who do the top deals were just telling to me in London there just a few weeks ago, is that the other side are always trying to commoditize what you do so they can compare and say, well, that crowd will give it the same thing for this price. And my whole thing is you always need to know exactly how you're different and need to be explain it very quickly and very concisely, but truthfully, impactfully, you know? So it's exactly that. You're talking about differentiation. So how are you different?
My company, Microfame Media, I guess you could say that our competitors are in the marketing space and marketing agencies. So, you know, we all have the same end. We work with companies and we want to try to make them well-known so that they get clients. And what people will say to me is, well, this and this marketing company, they're going to give me a website, 6 articles a week, blah, 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 for this fee. And what I'll say to them is, that's great. That's because they're a marketing agency and you should go for them. In fact, we'll give you 0 articles. In fact, we're not going to even do the work. You are. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, my goal is to weave hype through every fiber of your DNA.
I love it.
We're going to train you on the hype principles. We're going to set up the experiments with you. I'm going to come up with the experiments standing by your side. I'm going to assess them with you. I'm going to pick them apart. I'm going to help you scale them. But if you don't go out and do the work, you're not going to succeed. You'll have no skin in the game. So if you're looking for someone to do the work, if you're looking for an agency, feel free. They're out there. But we're going to charge you more money and you're going to do the work because it's better for you.
That'll actually make
and it's true. And if they don't, I don't want them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a better program. I mean, I can't tell you, when I was a pure agency, I can't tell you how many clients will I remember one client I would come up with these really, really creative hype ideas for them. Wonderful, amazing. And then 2 weeks later, they would say, we're very unhappy because Joe, the boss, that's not his real name, doesn't have time anymore. And you need to come up with tell us how you're going to execute them. What are you going to do on LinkedIn? And then you have to go through that argument because ultimately you're responsible for doing the tactics.
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't show up because they feel they're like, hey, you're the one, you market for us. I don't have to do anything. But that doesn't work. So I said, you know what? We're not going to play that game. And I don't have to negotiate.
It's a great point. It's a great point. I mean, that's the rule number one in negotiation. Do you really need to negotiate? You know, that's the first question. Yeah. Do you need to negotiate? But you're right.
I won't do it. Yeah.
You remind me there actually of Perry Marshall, you know, the Google AdWords guy. He's a mega consultant now, but he started out in the Google AdWords. But he always used to say, you can take my copy, just copy and paste it word for word. You will not get the results that I get. Because the context 100%, is different.
That's exactly it.
And that's the point. It's like people don't pay me for the copy; they pay to get it out of you. You know,
you're not paying me for tweets. You're paying for my ideas. You're paying me for my process. You're paying me for a result, right? And if you don't want that, there are plenty of companies out there who will manage your social media.
Absolutely, and it'll be one and done, or you turn the hose on, turn the hose off. Yeah, it's
and there's value in that. There's value in that. It depends where you're at in your business. I just won't compete with them. I don't need to negotiate, you know, because I do what I do and we do what we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are some of the red flags that you see when you're talking to potential clients? Now, I can imagine, you know, if they're not on board, some of the obvious things that you mentioned there, but I'm just wondering what other red flags make you don't think we're right to work together, pal, you know?
So I think like 98% of people who start their own business, and I'm sure there's a 2% enlightened group who don't start this way, but I would take on anyone who was willing to pay me in the beginning, you know, anyone in my expertise.
It's very honest, yeah.
That had money.
Right.
Yeah. But now I'm quite the opposite because I've been through so many experiences where the work, you know, I say this to people when I'm in the early stages of a relationship, and I don't say it to be self-deprecating. I say it because it's true. There are so many things that I'm bad at, like really bad. Like I think I have a learning disability with directions, with spatial, and I'm not joking. Like I get lost in my own neighborhood. I actually think I have a learning, and I know no one diagnosed me, but I've struggled with this my whole life. I'm not particularly organized. You know, there's just so many things that I'm bad at, but there are a handful of things that I'm like exceptionally good at. And one of them is I can get in a room with people and do a series of exercises that I've devised, and come up with a hypothesis for a hype strategy. And I say hypothesis because until you experiment and test it, it's a hypothesis, but that's extremely creative and extremely workable, and will get you to where you want to be. Am I the best Twitterer in the world? No, I'm solidly mediocre. You know, am I the best landing page person in the world? Can do it, but there are many better people. Jeff Walker from Launch is better at that.
Sure.
So it's not even about red flags. I've gotten really ruthless and rigorous, and I can do that because I have a name now. I do this one thing. I mean, we work with companies, we indoctrinate them in hype, we set up hype experiments for each hype strategy. We work with them to experiment it till it works. We help them scale it out. And by the time that we've worked together for a long time, they are getting to whatever business goal they have through hype. If it's copy, I'm a great copywriter, and I can say that because so many things. I don't do copywriting because it's too much work for not enough money. And I can add more value to more people doing this thing that only I can do. So it's not even red flags. It's more just like, I know the kind of work we're best at and that I enjoy. And that's what I do.
So other than read your book, what can some of the listeners do if they're going, okay, I'm with you. I love the punk angle. I love the mischief. I need to differentiate my business from all those others out there in my little sector. What are some of those things they can start to do? We mentioned a few of them already, but what else? What are the next things that they can start to look at?
Yeah, I mean, other than those two questions, I mean, here are a couple ones. There's again, it's a whole book, so it's hard to do. But I'll just throw a few that you can do immediately. One piece that I talk about a lot is called Create a Secret Society. It's this idea that so many of us are worried about organically building this big following person by person, and we get very frustrated when it takes a long time or when it doesn't deliver. And if you look at the most sophisticated hype artists, they make it look like they're developing a strategy person by person. I mean, a following person by person. But what they tend to do is under the surface, they're building this group of well-placed and powerful people who can make things happen for them. And that's much more doable than you would think. So what I would do is I would create a list of like 50 to 100 people who that if you knew them, if they were part of your intimate friend group, if even 25% of the group thing was, the list was, that you would do well, right? And then think to yourself, what are some things that I can offer these people and give these people that is cheap for me, but very valuable to them? So we've talked about music
that's
a lot.
That's one of the key. Sorry to interrupt. That's one of the key principles that I talk to people continually. Like, where can you add value that's easy for you, but has high perceived value to the other side, and vice versa? You know. So I'm with you on that. So keep going. Sorry, Mike.
It's amazing. Yeah, all these. Oh, I didn't mean to overtalk. It's like freezing a little. We're having these internet, things. But, I just want to say as an aside, all of these things that depend on psychology, negotiation, persuasion, hype, whatever you want to call it, these are all semantics, and there's so much blurriness between them, right? I mean, the reason that you're finding that some of these things work in negotiation is because it's based on human beings are more alike than they are different. Our brains work a certain way. We behave a certain way in groups. So I'm not surprised that you would see that again and again in negotiation. But yeah, I mean,
sorry, I interrupted because you were saying getting the list. You can appeal 50 to 100 people, and what can you give them? And then what do you do?
So what I would do is, first of all, if you're going to use social media, one way to use it is not to try to build a big following. Use it to benevolently stalk these people. So find these people. So what I mean is, look at these people that you're interested in knowing, and instead of like tweeting motivational quotes at them or talking about how you want to pick their brain or whatever, look for them to say something that you have an actual common human interest in. Like, let's say, they tweet all things Twitter because that's whatever, but it could be anything. But they put all kinds of stuff up, all this business stuff. And then one day they say something about a minor league baseball team that you both like, or the saxophone that you both play.
Right.
And you talk to them about that. They will talk to you about that any day and won't even notice you if you talk about business, because people are trying to hit them up about business all day long and their cortisol level goes up. It's like, what does this person want from me? Especially if they're successful. Mm-hmm. But if you talk to them as a human being to another human being about fishing, about comic books, about whatever it is, this quirky thing you have in common, then it's just a human being talking to a human being about a tribal affinity. And then once you do that, it becomes very doable to start a conversation. And this becomes much easier in the days of the internet. So for example, I'm on your podcast right now. Mm-hmm. If you ever call me, now let's say that over the next 6 months, you saw somebody, that was someone I might find interesting. I don't know, a crowd psychologist. And you say, hey, Mike, I know people are making introductions to you all the time, but this guy, I happen to have a friend who works at University of whatever, who's a crowd psychologist, and they'd love to meet you. They really liked your book. And you did something like that 3 times in a year. If you needed something from me, 100%. I mean, why wouldn't I help you? At this point, you're a friend. You're someone who just kind of helped me out, right? So, I know this guy, Dave Lindsay, who started a $500 million company from his garage, Defender Direct. It was an alarm company.
Right.
It's a personal security company. And I interviewed him for something. And that was it. And he obviously was being his professional kind of guarded self. And then he mentioned that he had just moved from Indiana to New York. And one of the reasons he moved, he was very close to selling his business. He always liked New York, but he especially loved live music. And he couldn't find much live music in, Indiana. Right. Now, I happen to know, I don't have $500 million, but I happen to know a lot about live music in New York, especially then. I said, hey, I'd be happy to show you around. And the timing was right. If it had been 6 months later, it wouldn't have worked.
Right.
He became like my biggest mentor, you know? I mean, I can't tell you how meaningful, because I gave him something that was, I mean, he could have hired a personal jet, but he couldn't get someone who knew the New York music scene because he was from Indiana.
Right. That's a brilliant example. It's a great point. And as you said, it's all kind of above board and people helping people and
100%.
doing it in an authentic way.
People's
right?
lives better. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. Exactly it. And people, this is getting away from where we started. This is exactly where we started, as in we're getting away from marketing in inverted commas,
Right.
where people are doing this kind of cold, overly business-like, non-humane process, rather than actually adding the mischief, the playfulness, and that emotional side of creativity. Exactly. You know. So I'm loving the message. I'm loving the message, Mike. So just when we're talking, you're talking about, you know, in Indiana to New York and cultural differences. I love the part at the end of your book where you talk about the differences in China. What were some of the insights you got from that experience?
Yeah, this was a life-changing experience that I just sort of happened into and really was meaningful. I met these really great guys who are friends of mine now, Sibin and Zheyu Zheng. And just to give the summary, they were both people, you know, they both moved from China when they were 12 and 14, respectively, to the US, met in college at Boston University, and they were both very entrepreneurial, and they started a business together, which it was sort of a class, you know, an online course company, which everyone's trying to start now. Everyone's following the herd, and many are failing. Where their distinguishing advantage is that they knew that because of the changes that have happened in China, people in China still see the United States as the most sophisticated entrepreneurship company, because they've had so many years of not having that, and now it's an explosion. And they saw that there were all these new entrepreneurs in China who wanted to learn American style entrepreneurship. And they were in unique position where they were simultaneously Chinese and American. They were seen as being American because they had lived there for years, but also seen as being Chinese, and they can speak Chinese and they know the Chinese social media. So from the computer lab, they created this company with a complete remote team and are just killing it. I mean, they built this very, very big company. So they each other for various reasons, and they invited me to speak at their big conference in China, which, to give you an idea of how far they've come, it was held in the St. Regis. You know, it was the news was there. You know, the Shenzhen news, lots of news cameras. They're like big bulls over there, and they're young guys. I mean, 24, 25, something. And the thing that was so interesting, I went on stage and I had a translator, and I was talking about hype. A lot of times when I speak in the United States, I've had a lot of great audiences, and I speak a relatively large amount, or at least I did before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And people like it, but I'll always get questions about, well, should we be doing this hype thing and And I'll always make the point that, the bad guys already get it. If you're creating something really good, a good product, a good service, it's your moral imperative to really use the realities of human nature to ethically branch into it. And some people get that, some people don't. I was in China and I made that point. I said that thing at the end, and people gave me a standing ovation. And I found out later from the social media platform that one person was crying. And I think what it was that, in China, I mean, I think on the surface, part of it is that they really see the changing economy as an opportunity to make their lives better, Mm-hmm. And I also think they know deep down, I couldn't say this in China, that propaganda and things like that have been used in the past to harm them. And the fact that you can actually use it to better your life, and do it in an ethical way. I mean, no one ever talks about this there, but the reaction was so overwhelming that was obviously a part of it. And it was a neat experience. I mean, touching people like that. I made good friends. I was there for 10 days. I got to hang out with Chinese people, it wasn't like a tourist kind of trip. And it was I really grew up. I gained a real fondness for the people in China. It was a great experience.
Outstanding stuff. Yeah, as you said, it sounds like you were giving this structure, these things. You're putting a label on a lot of these things that society, more than many others, maybe they've experienced, as I said, on the receiving end, and to a certain degree. And this puts some of the power back in their hands, but in a more positive way, which is pretty outstanding stuff. So we're just coming up on time here. So I will pause, and I use the word pause on purpose. I will pause our conversation there, Mike. So thank you very much for that fantastic insights. I cannot recommend the book enough. For anyone interested in psychology, in, as I said, flipping an awful lot of things that are used maybe with negative applications in the past, to a more positive ones. And you give mixtures of both. The principles are fairly neutral, but as you said, it's the application that's key. It's a fascinating read. Can't recommend it enough. And it's the Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers. And it's published by McGraw-Hill. And as I said, it's by the author, Michael F Schein. So once again, thanks a million, Michael, and hope to have you on the show again for maybe a follow-up chat.
Anytime you want me, I'll be here. This was one of my favorite conversations. So thank you, Al.